Hey families, and welcome to Class 8 assignment. Remember, we're testing Lamarck's hypothesis. And just to remind you, Lamarck was hypothesizing that the reason we have all these different species, although they do appear to be related in certain ways, was that parents will stretch themselves to gain new adaptations to new environments or just to better leverage their current environments, and that once they've made these adaptations, once they've stretched themselves, they then pass these adaptations on to their children. Now, it apparently takes a very long time. Algae were around for over 1 billion years before moss started appearing. I realize that you probably don't want to spend roughly 1 billion years testing Lamarck's hypothesis. Fortunately, you're already well on your way in terms of the work you need to do. So, to remind you, you have been sorting your fruit flies ever since our Ready experiment in class 6. And you have 5 different kinds of fruit flies: Antennapedia, Ebony, eyeless, vestigial, and white eyes. And in the process of sorting them, right, you need to anaesthetize them, otherwise they tend to fly away. So for roughly half of your 5 different kinds of flies, you've been anesthetizing them with cold, just putting them in the fridge, and half of them you've been anesthetizing with CO2, evolving carbon dioxide with either Alka-Seltzer or baking soda and citric acid and maybe vinegar or soda or whatever you found worked best. So now we're going to cross at least one female virgin from each of the 5 types with one male of each of the 5 types, and vice versa, one male of each of the 5 types with one female. So here's what I'm thinking. You've got an Antennapedia female that you cross with an Antennapedia male, and that's just going to give you more Antennapedia, just, kind of replenish your pure breeding stocks, but also with the Ebony, eyeless, vestigial, and white eyes. But you're also going to take 4 additional Antennapedia males and cross them with Ebony, eyeless, vestigial, and white-eyed flies. You don't need to do a second cross of Antennapedia male and female Antennapedia because you've already done that here at the top left. So this will be 25 crosses in total. Now, here's where testing Lamarck comes in, right? Because again, roughly half of your flies will have been cold adapted, and hopefully yours aren't necessarily Antennapedia, ebony, white eyes. Maybe they're eyeless and vestigial. But in any case, I noticed that when I first started cold anesthetizing my flies, I put them in the fridge, check them every 5 minutes or so, and it took about 20 minutes the first time I did it to I'd tap the sides, the flies would fall down, and they wouldn't get up and start crawling up the sides again. But very quickly, an hour was not long enough to anesthetize them. And after that, I sort of I wasn't going to check in the fridge every 5 minutes for an hour. And then one day I forgot my flies in the fridge, and I was worried that I'd killed them, and it turns out they were fine. And that's when I knew they were pretty cold adapted. Now, my fridge may be a little warmer than I think it is, but nevertheless, it illustrates that over time and over days and days of anesthetizing and sorting the flies, they did become very cold adapted. So there are lots of ways to test whether my Antennapedia, ebony, and white-eyed flies have passed on that cold adaptation to their offspring. And probably the easiest one is to do what I did with the parents, is to take the adult offspring of my crosses, put them in the fridge, check them every 5 minutes, and see when I tap them if they fall down to the bottom. Now, I can't control the fridge temperature very well, so it'll be helpful to compare the children of cold adapted flies to the children of non-cold adapted flies. So we can compare directly, like the children of the Antennapedia versus Antennapedia, the Antennapedia crossed with Ebony, et cetera, versus eyeless crossed with eyeless crossed with vestigial, and compare the time it takes the flies to take a nap once you put them in the fridge. But if you have a different method for testing cold adaptation, please put it in the comments. It's a little frustrating to kind of check the fridge every 5 minutes. So if you've got a better idea, I'd love to hear it. So what if Lamarck is right? What we're kind of expecting is that cold adapted parents together will have cold adapted children, but cold adapted parents crossed with non-cold adapted parents, such as Ebony and eyeless cross, will maybe give the kids some intermediate cold adaptation. So instead of maybe taking an hour or overnight for the kids to be anesthetized in the fridge, maybe it takes half an hour, but maybe not 20 minutes. Maybe you do need a little bit longer, and you'd expect that the eyeless and vestigial crosses, 20 minutes is probably enough. Now maybe the fridge is warmed up a little bit, so maybe it takes half an hour for the eyeless and vestigial crosses, but the intermediate crosses, like white eyes plus eyeless, right? Maybe it takes 45 minutes, and then white eyes times Ebony, maybe that takes an hour, So, but we also don't know if, first, we don't know if cold adaptation is heritable, which means that the kids will be born with cold adaptation. But we also don't know if it is heritable by what means, right? Maybe only the females, maybe only the moms pass on cold adaptation, or maybe only the dads pass on cold adaptation. That's why we're doing all possibilities, just to make sure that we haven't missed anything. So just to summarize, our hypothesis based on Lamarck is that, so if you've got two cold adapted parents, Antennapedia times Antennapedia times Ebony, Antennapedia times white eyes, Ebony times Ebony, Ebony times white eyes times white eyes, those should all, we think, have produce adult flies in the next generation that are already cold adapted. Like, it's already harder to knock them out with cold. But maybe, a mix of parents, one that's cold adapted and one that isn't, like Antennapedia and eyeless, Antennapedia and vestigial, Ebony and eyeless, Ebony and vestigial, white eyes and Ebony, or sorry, eyeless and white eyes and vestigial, kind of intermediate cold adaptation. Like, it's not like, they'll act like they've maybe seen cold before, even though they haven't, but not like, no amount of cold is gonna slow them down. And then, the when you have a cross with two parents that aren't cold adapted, in my case, eyeless times eyeless times white eyes, and white eyes times white eyes, you're going to, sorry, that should be vestigial. I goofed there. Anyway, eyeless times vestigial, vestigial times vestigial. Those should act like they've never seen cold before, and it should knock them out pretty quickly. Now, again, this is what my crosses are going to look like. Now, if you, instead of using cold to anesthetize eyeless, you use it to anesthetize Ebony, right? Like, who's going to give you cold adaptation is going to be a little different. but that's the general idea. Now, if you're really digging this stuff, there's another control that you can do. So, it's formally possible that if cold adaptation is heritable, that it can be passed on from parent to offspring, that it sort of depends on the genetic makeup of um, the flies. So another control you can do is to have the same genetic makeup, but with parents that are either cold adapted or not. And the way you're going to do that is with your backup flies in the ready experiment. So remember that in class 6, we had those jars, and in those jars there was one open container of fruit fly food and one closed container. There shouldn't be any flies in the closed container propagating, but there should be flies propagating in the closed container, in the open container, excuse me. And you'll have backups of each of your five different types of flies, and they shouldn't be cold adapted. So you can take your cold adapted, virgin females and males and cross them with your non-cold adapted virgin females and males and see what happens. So in my case, it would be, for instance, I could take Antennapedia flies and cross cold adapted with males and females, which you already saw in the previous slide. That was the very top left box. But then I can also take cold adapted females and cross them with non-cold adapted males, and non-cold adapted female Antennapedia times cold adapted males, and then have both parents be non-cold adapted and have 4 different vials as a result of these crosses. And you could do that, I could do them for my ebony fruit flies if I have extra virgins and males, and my white-eyed flies, you know what I mean? So I could have an additional 12 crosses just to see if the genetic background matters in terms of whether or not you can inherit this cold adaptation. So just to remind you, even within the same type of fly, for in this case Antennapedia, if Lamarck is right, I'm expecting that with 2 parents you get, it's really hard to knock out the flies with cold. With one parent cold adapted and the other not, maybe it's a little it's a little quicker, but not super quick to knock out the flies in cold. And if neither, if both of the parents are coming from the ready jar, they're not cold adapted, and their kids will get knocked out pretty quickly with cold. So again, I like to give a lot of options in terms of what you can do with this course, and then brag about, right? Because you should be really proud of as much work as you do. This is something that I don't know of any course where you can say, hey, I tested Lamarck's hypothesis. I did more than Lamarck did. But if you don't feel like doing the extra credit, it's totally okay. You are going to want to do the original 25 crosses, and they're really quick to put together, but those are going to give you lots of data, and they're going to be really informative for the next several weeks. So yeah, at the very least, do those 25 crosses, and then if you want to do the extra credit, I would love to see your results. So good luck. I'll show you a couple of ways you can do your crosses to make it easy, because you've probably noticed at this point it can be a little frustrating. Sometimes the flies like to fly away. I kind of think that's their job. So you've got 25 vials of dried fly food with a little dry activated yeast on the top, and once you're ready to go, of course, you know how to hydrate them so that they're yummy for the fruit flies. The first thing I like to do is to label what the crosses are going to be, at least the first half of them. So you can see I've got, it's not mirrored, but it says white-eyed virgins. Incidentally, you probably know that the symbol for female is a circle with a plus sign. The symbol for a virgin female is not a Venus, but a Mercury symbol. So it's a circle with a plus sign below it, and then like sort of like two little horns coming off of it. It's actually meant to look kind of like Mercury's caduceus. But in any case, that's what we've got here. So now you've got your cold block. You may want to use more than one, but obviously they're pretty easy to put together. And you've also got some empty vials. They're supposed to be extra, but for now they're really useful in preparing your crosses. The other little hints I'll give you is that if you flubbed in your labeling, it's not a big deal. All you need is like some paper towel and a little bit of alcohol, like isopropyl alcohol, which you can get at a pharmacy, often a grocery store. Just a little bit of that, wetting the paper towel, and just rub the, if you've got permanent marker, it's really easy to clean with a little alcohol. I do it all the time. I'm going to take my, oh, that's eyeless. My white-eyed males. Here are my white-eyed females. Okay, so I've got my cold block, so just tamp them down so they don't get any funny ideas. And so there's gonna be one more. That's cool. And now I've got my brush, and I can just brush them. If you want, it doesn't hurt either to use your magnifying glass that you built and double check that they are in fact all females. Although if you've kept them in their own container for a couple of weeks and there's no larvae coming up, you can be pretty confident that they're all one gender. Okay. So what I like to do is I like to kind of like brush, your one or two virgins into each tube, and then like set the tube on its side. Sometimes when they drop into the food, they kind of get stuck, which you may have noticed. Just give them a tamp down so that they're, not stuck to anything. Give them a chance to wake up. All right, and I've already done my white-eye cross, so at this point I only need the 4. And then let's say I want to do cross with an eyeless male. What I'm going to do is pretty much the same thing. You can see they like want to kind of hide up in there. I wonder if I can tip them over so because they'll start crawling up towards what they think is the top, but the bottom, and then tamp, and oh, come on. Get any ideas here? Grab a male and put it in one of the white-eye female. And hopefully they wake up. But I will make sure to label. you can see my label there. I've got white-eyed virgin and eyeless male, and that is one of the 25 crosses we're gonna do, minus, and of course there are some bonus crosses you can do, but that's really the gist of it. So yeah, enjoy. It might make fly crosses easier is using those extra tubes. So you've got my male eyeless fruit fly in the food tube, and it's labeled for the cross. Eyeless male versus white-eyed female, and I've got my white-eyed female in here. And what you can do if you're feeling dexterous is tamp them both down. It can be tricky, man. They love, or you can also like flip them so they kind of crawl upwards. Yep. And where are you? Yep. And then take out both of the cotton ball kind of things, and then tamp them both down into one. And you can see they're I don't know if you can see this, but they're crawling around. They're doing just fine. Yeah, sometimes that makes it easier, sometimes no. You know, I've taught a lot of students over the year, and doing this thing with both tubes at once takes a little practice, and I swear every student I've taught this technique to says, I'm going to be the person who's never going to get it. I'm like, everyone says that. It's never been true. It feels horrible the first couple of times you do it, but with a little practice, it becomes second nature. The thing I'll recommend is that you take a longish piece of tape and kind of start one end on the side of your plastic tube and kind of flip it over the top here, tightish, and so that it like overlaps on the other side of the tube. That's just to hold the plug in place, because it's really annoying when the plug pops out. I'm not too worried about it, but you know, just make sure that you're not like covering the whole thing in tape, because flies can suffocate. They seem to be doing pretty well right now, so yeah, your crosses are ready. And like I said, it normally takes about 10 days between generations of flies. So if you notice around day 7 or so that you've got larvae kind of crawling up the side of the tube, and especially if you see these pupae starting to form on the side of the tube, it's a good time to either, how do I say this, send your adult flies in the cross to heaven by smooshing, or, you know, if you've got an extra tube and some extra food, you can just transfer them to a new tube, label them, and then you've got a backup, which is always nice.